For the first installment of our Cigar and Classic album pairing series, I wanted to start somewhere with a lot of meaning for myself personally. Um, this past year, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the beginning of hip hop. And it was a year filled with nostalgia and retrospectives for the culture and the music and the people that have had a massive global influence. There was cause for even greater celebration because one of hip hop's greatest groups was finally set after years of fighting to be justly compensated, to have their music be available on streaming platforms and therefore be accessible to younger and future generations. But right before it happened, tragedy struck, and one of the members of that group passed away far too soon. And of course, I'm talking about De La Soul. De La, the trio of Pastanus, Dave, aka Trugoy, and Maceo, has one of not only the best catalogs in hip hop, one of the most experimental and boundary pushing. Guys like Q-Tip, Andre 3000, Pharrell, and Lord help him, Kanye get a lot of deserved credit for influencing the sound and aesthetic of today's hip hop artists, but De La Soul should always be mentioned right there alongside them. Uh, my first experience of De La came when I was about 16 or 17, when I decided I really wanted to get into this hip hop thing, like not as a rapper or anything, but as an admirer, an appreciator, a lover of the art form. I was born in 1986, so hip hop was Black youth culture when I was coming up. So it was easy to take for granted. But by about 16, I became an obsessive in understanding where the culture and music came from and the meaning it held for the people creating and participating in it. I had this long list of classic and genre defining albums. And when I had some money, I hit the mall and went to the CD store. I'm dating myself right now. I'm old and it's all good. Uh, and I would buy whatever it was that I was interested in at that moment. And I picked up De La Soul is Dead at some point. Now, no, De La Soul is Dead is their second album, and I hadn't yet listened to the first 3 Feet Higher Rising. So I was confused. You kind of have to have heard 3 Feet High and Rising and be familiar with De La's history to actually understand what's happening on De La Soul is Dead. But I came in without that context. The skits made no sense. I wasn't sure what was a song and what wasn't all the time. The sounds were all over the place. Keep in mind, like this was the early aughts, and my hip hop understanding at this point was largely limited to beats, three verses, 16 bars, and a hook. The wildest, most experimental thing I'd heard to that point was Andre 3000's The Love Below, and I was able to get into that because I didn't really think of it as strictly a hip hop album. The thing is, oh, despite all my confusion, or maybe even because of it, I listened to De La Soul is Dead over and over and over and over again. And even without the context that I got later, I started to love it. Without doing the entire history of De La Soul, here's the context. 3 Feet High and Rising had been a success, due in part to what's still De La's most famous single, Me, Myself, and I. It's built around a sample of Funkadelic's Not Just Knee Deep. It was a track that was added late, partially due to label pressure to get a big radio hit. What's most important to note here was De La's image. Everything was built around daisies, which De La had introduced as an acronym standing for the inner sound, y'all. All of their press featured daisies, and alongside the eccentric style, Africa, and peace medallions, they got dubbed hip hop hippies. They didn't love it. They were kids. They were about peace. So they kind of rolled with it until it meant they were getting constantly tested out on the road by people who saw them as weak. The story goes that they were at the label offices looking at the remaining tour schedule on whiteboard, and a frustrated Dave wiped the entire thing off and wrote, De La Soul is dead in its place. If you don't have that context and the only knowledge you have going into listening to De La Soul is Dead is that it's De La's second album, you might be, like I was, a little lost. You've got these skits that are half poking fun at De La themselves, but also their rap peers and the broader hip hop listening community. You got what feels like a random house song and off-key opera singing track, a couple more straightforward boom bap songs, but then also some stuff with no hooks that changes up beats and tempo each verse. And on first listen, it feels all over the map. But there's also stuff like a roller skating jam named Saturdays and Ring 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 that are undeniable jams from the jump. And then one of the illest storytelling tracks ever recorded in Millie Pull a Pistol on Santa. And if you let yourself be pulled into the experience through these more familiar sounding songs, and let's be real, Boston Dave's rhyming is still just slightly off kilter in the absolute best way, you're rewarded with the richness of the whole album. It's a document of a group that had quickly grown disillusioned with the industry and decided to punch back at those who wanted to define them without actually knowing them. There's a harder edge to some of these songs, but throughout they still retain their youthful exuberance and penchant for experimentation and zany ideas. I'm pairing this album with the Sobremesa Brûlée Blue from Dunbarton Tobacco Trust because I had a similar experience in smoking this that I had to listening to De La Soul is Dead. I didn't love it at first. Connecticut's really aren't my main drag, and like so many before me, I wasn't sure if there's a sweet tip or not. But the initial confusion was met with intrigue. Brûlée Blue is a Connecticut that has way more strength and flavor than your typical Connecticut on the market, owing to that higher grade, less commonly used wrapper, and that slimmer Vitola concentrating everything. I found myself returning to this cigar often, more intent on discovering the layers beyond the controversial is it sweet tip or not, and finding the sweet baked dough notes, the creamy center, a slight herbaceousness, and more that I'm still identifying. And I guess that's the thing to take away from this: patience and discovery. Confusion isn't a place to write something off, but a starting point for curiosity, asking how and why. There's great pleasure to be found in the attempts to understand.